Thank you very much for being with us. Russian troops are patrolling between Turkish and Syrian forces in northeastern Syria. Russia has stepped into the gap left by US President Donald Trump's decision to pull out his troops, a move that triggered a long-anticipated incursion by Turkish forces to attack the Kurds, who they regard as terrorists threatening their border. Well, US personnel on the ground are reported to be saying that Trump has betrayed the Syrian Kurds, who of course were US allies in the battle against the Islamic State group. Here at France 24, Lauren Berstecker with this.
Hoping to fill the military and diplomatic void left by the US, Russian troops moved into northern Syria on Tuesday as Moscow sought to prevent the Turkish army from clashing with forces loyal to Bashar al-Assad.
No one wants this kind of clash to happen. We have always urged Turkey to show restraint and have always considered any kind of military operation on Syrian territory to be unacceptable.
The move came 2 days after the Kurdish administration agreed to a Russian-brokered deal with the Syrian government, allowing Bashar al-Assad to send troops to help repel Turkey's invasion. On Tuesday, the Syrian army entered the strategic city of Manbij for the first time since 2012. Yet fighting raged on further east as emboldened Kurdish troops attempted to retake the town of Ras Al Ain, which had fallen to Turkey days earlier. There were also reports of a Kurdish rocket attack on the Turkish border town of Kiziltepe. Despite the clashes, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said on Tuesday the offensive was progressing as planned.
We have liberated approximately a 1,000 square kilometer area from terrorist occupation. God willing, in a short while, we'll secure the entire area from Manbij to our border with Iraq.
The U.S.'s decision to pull out of Syria last week was widely seen as a major turning point, giving Turkey free rein to launch its offensive against the Kurds. But with Russia now stepping in as the region's new power broker and the prospect of a direct conflict with the Syrian army, the situation seems to have changed for Ankara.
Let's bring you some international developments on this story. The French Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian has called for a meeting of the international coalition against the Islamic State group, which includes the United States and Turkey, to discuss the situation in the northeast of Syria. Of course, many jihadists are held in prison camps there and are rumoured to have escaped. Le Drian says he wants to also meet with the Syrian Kurds. US officials say that Vice President Mike Pence will leave within 24 hours for Ankara to press Turkey on a ceasefire and reinforcing its call for an immediate halt in hostilities. Iran has called on Turkey to end the deadly assault on northeastern Syria. The imperative now is to end the incursion into Syria, the words of the Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif, writing on social media. Of course, the man we saw there is Iran's President Hassan Rouhani. And just as a postscript to those remarks, Recep Tayyip Erdogan just moments ago saying that Turkey, quote, can never declare ceasefire in North Syria. Well, let's bring in now our correspondent, Philip Crowther. He's got more on the US perspective on the crisis that many say they created by turning away from their former Syrian Kurd allies.
The Vice President, Mike Pence, then will be travelling very quickly to Turkey to meet with the Turkish President Erdogan. It won't be only Vice President Pence who'll be arriving in Turkey on Wednesday. He'll be there alongside Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Donald Trump's national security advisor to ask for a ceasefire, in the words of US President Donald Trump just a few hours ago. This, of course, is a request for an end to the Turkish assault in northeastern Syria, an assault that only began once US troops had left that same area. Those troops, by the way, US troops, are still in northeastern Syria, despite an announcement from the Pentagon that 1,000 US troops would be leaving northern Syria pretty much straight away, according to a US official who commented on this anonymously to the Reuters news agency. There were actually Turkish-backed forces that got very close indeed to US forces on the ground, which led to a so-called show of force by US military aircraft aircraft in order for there to be no direct confrontation. But this does go to show that such a confrontation is still very much possible. At the same time, the United States and the US president are still saying that further strong sanctions could be possible against Turkey if the United States does not get what it wants, which is clearly an end to that Turkish offensive into northeastern Syria and a ceasefire that the US hopes the Vice President Mike Pence can get in Turkey. There is still that threat from the president, a threat that he makes in person and on Twitter, that he would be able to destroy Turkey's economy if it was not to follow the United States' advice.
Full crowd of that in the United States.
Glad you could join us at 6 in the morning in Singapore, 11 in the evening in London, and 1 a.m. in Syria, where Turkey is continuing its military offensive in northern Syria, aiming to defeat Kurdish forces whom they regard as terrorists and to create what they call a safe zone to resettle millions of Syrian refugees presently in Turkey. Well, the conflict erupted after the United States withdrew its troops from the region. They had been supporting the Syrian Kurds in the area. President Trump's action has been widely condemned for altering the balance of power in the region. And tomorrow, Vice President Mike Pence will travel to Turkey for talks. Our North America editor, John Sopel, has more from Washington.
The extraordinary American retreat in one selfie video. A Russian wearing a New York Yankees cap playfully shows us around a newly abandoned US military base in northern Syria. The Russians are gratefully filling a vacuum. And as if to underline this major power shift in the Middle East, just look at the welcome the United Arab Emirates were laying on this morning for the Russian leader, Vladimir Putin, as they gave him the red, well, blue carpet treatment. But it's a very different picture on the ground in northern Syria, where the Turks continue their bombardment. And don't think it's just Kurdish fighters that are the target. If you strike residential areas, then children who know nothing of this conflict will be its victims too. The fighting has prompted the UK to join some other European nations in suspending arms sales to Turkey. In Washington, the president has faced a barrage of criticism, and there are signs the pressure is beginning to tell, with tougher sanctions being imposed against Turkey.
We want to bring our soldiers back home, and we're being very tough on Turkey and a lot of others. We're asking for a ceasefire. We put the strongest sanctions that you can imagine, but they get a lot. We have a lot in store if they don't have an impact.
And the result of the pressure can be seen by comparing the difference in tone between Donald Trump last week and the Vice President Mike Pence last night.
Syrian Defense Forces have been a strong ally of the United States.
They didn't help us in the Second World War. They didn't help us with Normandy, as an example.
Well, the United States of America did not give a green light to Turkey to invade Syria.
But he said, I want to go in, I want to go in. But he's been telling me that for 2.5 years.
The president is very concerned about instability in the region.
They're there and we're here. We're many miles away.
The ledger on Donald Trump for these past 10 days is pretty harsh. He stands accused of betraying America's Kurdish allies, of allowing Islamic State to regroup, of creating a humanitarian disaster, of giving Russia, Syria and Iran a major strategic victory. On the upside, he is bringing 1,000 US troops out of Syria, but they're not coming home. They're being redeployed to Iraq. A week of artillery fire, bombing and fighting has claimed the lives of many civilians and prompted at least 160,000 to flee their homes. All the result of one phone call between President Erdogan and Donald Trump. John Sopel, BBC News, Washington.